Your soulmate hired a psychic to prove you were fake. What she found made them cry for hours. My beloved child. Your soulmate walked into that psychic's room believing they were finally going to prove something about you, that the connection they felt was exaggerated, that the strange pull toward you was only imagination, and that everything their heart kept whispering could be explained away. They even brought something connected to you, expecting the psychic to take one look and confirm their doubts. But the moment she focused on you, her expression changed. She stopped speaking. Your soulmate noticed immediately and asked what was wrong, but she didn't answer. Instead, she looked again, more carefully this time, as though she had discovered something she hadn't expected to find. That silence unsettled them more than any answer could have. Because they had entered that room hoping to hear that you were fake. Yet suddenly, the person they had paid to prove it seemed unable to say those words. Don't skip, because what she finally noticed wasn't about whether your feelings were real. It was about something your soulmate had completely misunderstood about you. After several long seconds, the psychic asked your soulmate a question they were not prepared for. Why are you trying so hard to prove this person means nothing to you? That question landed differently. Your soulmate tried to brush it aside, insisting they only wanted clarity. But she wasn't convinced. She told them that whenever they spoke about you, their entire energy shifted. Their voice softened. Their posture changed. Even while trying to describe you as someone they should forget, they kept remembering tiny details, your way of speaking, the moments you stayed quiet, the things you did without asking for recognition. And then came the first revelation. She said the distance between you wasn't evidence that the connection was false. In her reading, it pointed toward two people who had been protecting themselves in completely different ways. Your soulmate had mistaken your silence for indifference. They had mistaken your patience for weakness. And most painfully, they had mistaken your decision not to chase them as proof that you never cared. Stay till the end, because the next question she asked changed the entire atmosphere in that room. The psychic leaned forward and asked, "Has this person ever demanded that you choose them?" Your soulmate went quiet. The answer was no. Then she asked whether you had ever tried to control their decisions, force yourself into their life, or make them feel guilty for needing space. Again, the answer was no. That was when your soulmate's confidence began to disappear. Everything they had called fake suddenly looked different. Maybe you hadn't stepped back because you felt nothing. Maybe you stepped back because you cared enough not to force what needed to happen naturally. The psychic then said something that made their eyes fill instantly. You came here asking me to expose them, but everything you've told me keeps exposing your fear instead. Your soulmate couldn't respond. They stared downward, remembering conversations they had replayed incorrectly for months. But the tears that followed weren't yet the tears that lasted for hours. Something huge was waiting for them. Because before the session ended, the psychic asked to see one final thing connected to you, and the instant she saw it, she discovered the detail that made your soulmate finally break down. What happened next was nothing like your soulmate expected. The psychic studied that final item in complete silence, then slowly placed it down and asked, "Do you realize how much this person has been holding back?" Your soulmate froze. They had expected another vague observation, but instead, she began describing a pattern they recognized immediately. Whenever you were hurt, you didn't create chaos. You became quieter. Whenever you felt uncertain, you didn't demand reassurance. You watched, waited, and protected your dignity. And whenever your soulmate pulled away, you gave them room, even when doing so may have cost you emotionally. Suddenly, memories started returning to them differently. Moments they had labeled as coldness now looked like restraint. Moments they had dismissed as distance now carried another possibility entirely. The psychic wasn't telling them that you never struggled. She was showing them that your way of caring had been easy to misunderstand. And then she asked one question that made your soulmate's face change instantly. What if the person you were trying to expose was actually the person who refused to expose you? That question opened a memory your soulmate had tried not to revisit. There had been a moment when you could have embarrassed them, confronted them publicly, or revealed something personal they had trusted you with. You had every opportunity to make them regret hurting you. But you didn't. You protected what they had shared, even when you received nothing in return. Your soulmate had almost forgotten that detail because, at the time, your silence seemed insignificant. Now it felt enormous. The psychic noticed their reaction and said softly, "That's why you're here." Somewhere inside, you already knew this person was different. You just wanted someone to give you permission not to believe it. Your soulmate's eyes filled again. Don't skip. Because they still had one defense left. They asked the psychic whether perhaps you were simply good at appearing sincere. Maybe your kindness had been calculated. Maybe your distance was a strategy. The psychic listened carefully, then gave them an answer that removed the last place they had been hiding. She told them, calculated affection usually keeps score. What you're describing doesn't. Your soulmate stopped breathing normally for a moment. They began remembering all the things you never demanded back, the attention you gave without keeping count, the understanding you offered without turning it into leverage, and the moments you could have pressured them but chose not to. Then the psychic asked them to imagine one possibility. What if you had already accepted that they might never understand what you truly felt, and you still chose not to become bitter toward them? That was the thought that finally cracked something open. Your soulmate covered their face, and the tears came harder because the session was no longer about proving you fake. It was becoming a confrontation with how badly they may have misread you. But stay till the end, because the psychic still hadn't revealed the discovery that affected them most. Before your soulmate could compose themselves, she looked directly at them and said, "There's one reason this person stopped reaching the way they used to, and I think you already know exactly what it is." The room became painfully quiet after those words. Your soulmate knew exactly which moment the psychic meant, even before she explained it. There had been a point when you stopped trying to prove yourself. Not because your feelings suddenly disappeared, but because every attempt to get closer seemed to meet another wall. The psychic told them that sometimes a sincere person reaches a point where continuing to chase understanding begins to feel like abandoning their own self-respect. Your soulmate remembered the change in you. The shorter conversations, the calm acceptance, the way you stopped asking questions you already knew might never receive honest answers. They had interpreted that change as confirmation that you never cared deeply. Now another possibility was staring them in the face. Perhaps you had cared so deeply that stepping away was the hardest thing you ever chose. Something huge is waiting for you, because your soulmate suddenly remembered the exact conversation that happened just before everything changed. It had seemed ordinary at the time. Your soulmate had said something dismissive, perhaps without realizing how deeply it would land, and you didn't argue. You simply became quiet. You didn't demand an apology. You didn't create a dramatic goodbye. You allowed the conversation to end, and afterward, something about you was different. Sitting across from the psychic, your soulmate finally connected those two moments. "That was when I lost their trust, wasn't it?" they asked. The psychic didn't immediately answer. Instead, she said, "Maybe you didn't lose it completely. Maybe you taught them that showing you more of their heart wasn't safe for them emotionally." That sentence shattered your soulmate's last defense. They started crying again. Not because they believed everything was permanently ruined, but because they finally understood that your distance may have been a response to their own uncertainty. Don't skip, because what happened next transformed those tears from regret into something even deeper. Your soulmate asked the question they had been avoiding since entering the room: "Do you think they still care about me?" The psychic paused. She refused to give them the simple certainty they desperately wanted. Instead, she pointed toward something more meaningful: the fact that your soulmate had spent so much time searching for proof against you because accepting the possibility of something real frightened them more than losing something fake. That realization hit hard. They had hired someone hoping to walk away feeling justified, but now they were sitting there wondering whether their fear had pushed away the very connection they secretly wanted. Then the psychic said, "The question isn't whether you can uncover their heart from this room. The question is what you're willing to do with your own when you leave." Your soulmate wiped their eyes and looked toward the door, suddenly understanding that the reading had given them no easy escape. But before they stood up, the psychic stopped them. She had noticed one final contradiction in their story. And when she explained it, your soulmate realized you had quietly left them a clue they had overlooked for months. That overlooked clue had been hiding inside one of your soulmate's most ordinary memories. The psychic asked them to think carefully about the last time you had truly pulled away. "Did they disappear without explanation?" she asked, "or did they leave you something small that you ignored because you were expecting something dramatic?" Your soulmate's expression changed. Suddenly they remembered a sentence you had said almost casually, something along the lines of wanting peace more than confusion. At the time, they heard it as detachment. Now they understood the deeper possibility behind it. You weren't saying you felt nothing. You were saying you could no longer keep proving something that should eventually be recognized without constant persuasion. Stay till the end, because once your soulmate remembered that sentence, another forgotten detail surfaced. And this one made them realize you had given them more chances than they ever noticed. They began recalling all those tiny openings you had left behind. A conversation you didn't completely close. A thoughtful response when ignoring them would have been easier. A moment when you showed kindness even though the relationship between you felt uncertain. None of those moments screamed for attention, which was exactly why your soulmate overlooked them. The psychic explained that people often search for enormous declarations while missing quieter evidence sitting directly in front of them. Your soulmate had been waiting for you to chase, insist, or prove yourself repeatedly. But perhaps your affection had never worked that way. Perhaps you believed genuine connection required two people moving toward each other. That realization hurt because your soulmate suddenly saw how often they had remained still while secretly expecting you to cross the entire distance. "I kept testing them," they whispered. "And when they stopped taking the tests, I assumed they failed." The psychic's response was immediate, or maybe they finally realized love shouldn't feel like an endless examination. Those words stayed with your soulmate. For the first time, they stopped asking whether you were real and started questioning why they had needed so much proof in the first place. And that was where the tears lasting for hours truly began, not from some frightening prediction, but from recognition. They remembered your patience, your restraint, the times you could have walked away angrily but chose dignity instead. They realized the psychic hadn't uncovered some hidden flaw in you. She had uncovered the fear inside them that had distorted how they interpreted you. Don't skip, because the session still had one unexpected turn left. Your soulmate reached for their belongings, convinced the reading was finished, when the psychic suddenly asked them to sit down again. She had one final question, and unlike everything before it, this question wasn't about the past. It was about what your soulmate intended to do next. Their answer came immediately. But what they decided surprised even them. For the first time that day, your soulmate answered without hiding behind doubt. "I want to make it right," they said. But the psychic didn't let that sentence become an easy escape. She asked what "making it right" actually meant. Would they rush toward you because they were emotional in that moment, or would they finally approach you with the honesty they had avoided before? Your soulmate fell silent again. They realized that one dramatic message couldn't erase months of uncertainty. If they reached out, it couldn't be another test designed to measure your feelings. It couldn't be a vague sentence hoping you would do all the emotional work. Something had to change in them first. And then they admitted the truth they had been resisting since the session began: they had never really wanted proof that you were fake. They had wanted protection from discovering that you were real. Because if you were real, then losing you would actually matter. That confession changed everything. The psychic told them to stop treating vulnerability like evidence of weakness. She reminded them that you had already shown your character through the moments when nobody was rewarding you for it. Your soulmate suddenly remembered one specific night when they had expected you to react badly to their distance. Instead, you had responded with surprising calm. At the time, they thought you simply didn't care enough to fight. Now they wondered whether you had been fighting silently, with yourself, choosing dignity over desperation. That possibility brought the tears back. Stay till the end, because your soulmate then did something they hadn't planned to do. They pulled out their phone. Your name was still there. So was an unfinished message they had written days earlier and never sent. They opened it, read the first few lines, and immediately realized those words were filled with the same guarded behavior that had created the distance between you. They deleted the unfinished message. Not your number. Not your memory. Just the version of the message that still tried to protect their pride. Then they began writing again, slowly this time. No games. No hidden test. No attempt to make you jealous or force an immediate response. They wanted to acknowledge something simple. They may have misunderstood you, and they were finally willing to take responsibility for their side of the distance. But just before they pressed send, the psychic stopped them. "Wait," she said. Your soulmate looked up, confused. She explained that an apology means very little if it secretly demands instant forgiveness. If they truly respected you, they had to be prepared for whatever response came, even silence. Your soulmate stared at the screen, realizing this was the real test. Don't skip. Because after several seconds, they changed one final sentence in that message, pressed send, and what happened afterward was the reason they remained sitting in that room far longer than planned. The message showed as delivered, but nothing happened. No immediate reply. No sudden sign that everything had changed. Your soulmate stared at the screen, and for a moment, their old fear returned. They almost started rewriting the story in their head again. Maybe you didn't care, maybe they had waited too long, maybe the psychic had misunderstood everything. But this time, they caught themselves. The psychic quietly reminded them, "You said you wanted to respect this person. Respect also means giving them time." So your soulmate put the phone face down. That simple action was harder than it looked. For once, they weren't going to measure your feelings by how quickly you responded. They weren't going to turn your silence into evidence against you. And while they waited, another realization surfaced. Throughout your connection, they had often demanded certainty from you while offering uncertainty in return. That realization brought a different kind of emotion. Your soulmate began talking openly about moments they had never admitted mattered. They remembered checking for your messages while pretending they weren't waiting. They remembered hearing your name and immediately becoming more attentive. They remembered trying to convince friends, and themselves, that you were easy to forget, only to compare every new connection with the feeling they had around you. Don't skip. Because this was when the psychic finally understood why your soulmate had hired her in the first place. They weren't searching for truth about you. They were searching for permission to stop feeling what they already felt. If she had called you fake, they could have walked away believing their distance was justified. Instead, every question had led them back toward themselves. Your soulmate lowered their head and whispered, "I was trying to prove them wrong because admitting they mattered meant admitting I could lose something important." Then the phone vibrated. Your soulmate froze. Their hand moved toward it, then stopped halfway. For several seconds, they simply stared at the screen without turning it over. The psychic told them not to imagine what was written before actually reading it. Finally, they picked up the phone. There was a notification, but what appeared wasn't the long emotional response they had secretly hoped for. It was much shorter. Just enough to make their eyes fill again, because your words showed that you had read what they sent and understood exactly what they were trying to say. Yet there was something unusual about your response. You didn't immediately reopen the door, and you didn't completely close it either. Stay till the end, because your final sentence placed the next decision entirely in your soulmate's hands, and after reading it twice, they realized this time words alone wouldn't be enough. Your final sentence was calm, but it carried more weight than anything your soulmate had heard during that entire session. You weren't asking for another promise. You weren't demanding an explanation. You were simply making it clear that if anything between you was going to change, consistency would matter more than one emotional message. Your soulmate read those words again, and something inside them settled. For months, they had imagined that winning you back would require one perfect speech, one unforgettable gesture, one moment powerful enough to erase every misunderstanding. But you weren't asking for spectacle. You were asking, quietly, for something much harder to fake. Steady actions. The psychic watched their expression and asked, "Do you understand now?" Your soulmate nodded. They finally did. The person they had tried so desperately to expose wasn't demanding proof of love. You were asking for proof of emotional maturity. And that realization made the entire reading feel different. Your soulmate L. Your soulmate turned around, expecting one final piece of advice, but the psychic was staring at the item they had brought into the room. She pointed toward it and said, "There's something you told me at the beginning that doesn't match what you've told me since." Your soulmate looked confused. Then she reminded them of their original claim. They had said they came because something about you felt false. Yet during hours of conversation, they hadn't described a single clear moment when you deliberately deceived them. Every example they offered was about uncertainty, silence, distance, or their own interpretation of your behavior. That distinction landed hard. They had built an entire conclusion without solid evidence. The psychic leaned back and asked, "What if you weren't suspicious because this person gave you reasons not to trust them? What if you became suspicious because trusting them required you to risk being emotionally seen?" Your soulmate couldn't answer immediately. Don't skip. That question uncovered the deepest reason they had walked into that room. Slowly, your soulmate admitted something they had never said aloud. The more genuine you seemed, the more nervous they became. Your patience made them wonder when it would disappear. Your kindness made them search for hidden motives. Your consistency made them wait for the moment everything would suddenly change. They weren't reacting only to you, they were reacting to old expectations they had carried into your connection. And without realizing it, they had made you answer for disappointments you never created. The psychic didn't excuse their behavior. She simply helped them see the pattern clearly. Your soulmate covered their eyes as another memory surfaced. You had once told them, very gently, that you sometimes felt as though you were being judged for things you hadn't done. At the time, they dismissed that sentence. Now they understood exactly what you meant. Stay till the end, because remembering your words gave them a completely new understanding of why you eventually became quieter. Then came the detail that made everything click. The psychic asked whether your soulmate remembered what you did immediately after saying you felt unfairly judged. They did. You hadn't threatened to leave. You hadn't demanded that they change overnight. You had simply asked for honesty. That was all. And your soulmate realized they had responded by becoming even more guarded because honesty would have required admitting how much you mattered. Now, standing beside the door, they finally saw the painful irony. They had searched for something fake in you while hiding something real inside themselves. The tears returned, but this time they carried clarity rather than confusion. Your soulmate thanked the psychic again and finally stepped outside, believing the biggest revelation was behind them. But something huge was waiting for them. Because before they reached their car, their phone vibrated once more. And when they saw your name on the screen, they realized you had sent something completely unexpected. Your soulmate stopped before reaching the car and stared at your name glowing on the screen. This wasn't another short response. You had sent a longer message, and the first sentence immediately made them sit down because it confirmed something they had been wondering throughout the entire session. You explained that you had never expected perfection from them. What had exhausted you was constantly feeling as though your sincerity needed to be defended. You had noticed the questions hidden inside ordinary conversations, the moments when they pulled away just to see whether you would follow, and the subtle tests designed to measure how much you cared. You hadn't always confronted those things because you believed trust needed room to grow naturally. But eventually, you realized that repeatedly proving yourself wasn't bringing you closer together. It was slowly changing how safe you felt being open. Don't skip, because the next few lines showed your soulmate exactly what their doubt had cost. You told them that stepping back had never been intended as punishment. You simply reached a point where protecting your peace became necessary. You still valued what had existed between you, but you couldn't continue carrying both sides of the connection alone. Your soulmate read that sentence 3 times. It matched almost perfectly with what the psychic had helped them recognize. And suddenly those hours of tears made sense in an entirely different way. They weren't crying because someone had promised them a perfect future with you. They were crying because they could finally see the past without filtering everything through fear. Every unanswered question, every misunderstood silence, every moment they expected you to chase them, it all looked different now. Your message wasn't cruel. That made it even more powerful. You weren't trying to make them feel guilty. You were simply telling the truth they had avoided hearing. And then your soulmate reached the final lines. Those final lines didn't promise that everything would return to the way it was. Instead, you said that if they truly meant what they had written, there was no need to prove it tonight. Time would reveal whether their understanding was temporary emotion or genuine change. Your soulmate lowered the phone and looked back toward the psychic's building. For the first time, they understood why this couldn't end with another dramatic declaration. They had spent so long demanding evidence from you, now life was asking them to become evidence of their own words. Stay till the end. Because your soulmate made a quiet decision right there, they would stop chasing reassurance and start practicing consistency. But before they could leave, they noticed something at the bottom of your message, one small sentence they had somehow skipped the first time. When they read it carefully, their heart raced, because those few words revealed that you had known far more about their hidden feelings than they ever imagined. That small sentence changed the meaning of everything your soulmate had just read. You had written, "I always knew you cared more than you were willing to admit." Your soulmate stared at those words, almost embarrassed by how accurately you had seen through them. All those carefully controlled conversations. All the moments they pretended your absence didn't affect them. All the times they delayed responding because they didn't want to appear too invested. You had noticed. But instead of exposing them or forcing a confession, you had quietly allowed them to move at their own pace. Suddenly, your soulmate understood something the psychic had been trying to show them for hours. Your silence had never meant you were unaware. Sometimes you understood exactly what was happening and simply chose not to pressure them. Don't skip. Because once they realized you had seen through their defenses, one question became impossible to avoid. If you knew they cared, why had you finally stopped reaching? Your soulmate read your message again, searching between every line for the answer. Then they remembered something you had once said, understanding someone doesn't mean endlessly accepting uncertainty from them. That memory landed differently now. You could recognize their feelings and still decide that hidden affection wasn't enough to build something meaningful. You could care deeply and still require honesty. You could understand their fear without allowing that fear to determine the entire connection. For perhaps the first time, your soulmate saw the difference between being understood and being excused. The realization humbled them. They had secretly believed that because you understood their guarded nature, you would always remain exactly where they left you. But your message showed otherwise. You had compassion for them, yes, but you also had boundaries. And strangely, that made their feelings for you even clearer, because they finally saw you not as someone waiting to be chosen, but as someone who had already chosen self-respect. Your soulmate didn't reply immediately. Instead, they sat quietly and let that truth settle. Hours earlier, they had walked into a psychic's room hoping someone would give them a reason to dismiss you. Now they were outside, holding a message that revealed you had understood their hidden emotions long before they understood themselves. Something huge is waiting for you, because this changed their next decision completely. They no longer wanted to send you promises about who they would become. They wanted their next actions to speak first. So they typed only one sentence: "I understand what you're asking me to show, and I won't pressure you to believe me before I've shown it." Their finger hovered over send. But just before touching the screen, another notification appeared. It wasn't another message from you. It came from someone your soulmate had spoken to before visiting the psychic, and what that person revealed proved the doubts about you had started somewhere your soulmate never expected. The new message came from a friend your soulmate had trusted for months, the same person who had repeatedly encouraged them to question your intentions. At first, your soulmate assumed it would be another warning about you. Instead, the friend admitted something unexpected. They had never actually possessed proof that you were pretending. Their opinions had been built from fragments: your silence, your independence, the fact that you didn't constantly chase your soulmate for attention. Every time your soulmate expressed uncertainty, that friend had interpreted those details negatively and reinforced the fear already growing inside them. Reading the confession, your soulmate felt another layer of the story fall apart. The suspicion that eventually pushed them into the psychic's room hadn't begun with something you did. It had grown through assumptions repeated often enough to sound like facts. Don't skip, because the friend's next admission explained why those assumptions had become so convincing. The friend confessed that they had once seen something involving you that completely contradicted the story they had helped create. During a conversation when your soulmate wasn't present, someone had criticized your soulmate and expected you to agree. You could have joined in. You could have revealed private details or used the moment to make yourself look better. Instead, you quietly defended them and changed the subject. The friend had witnessed it but never mentioned it because, at the time, they didn't understand its importance. Your soulmate read that section twice. Here was another moment when your character had been revealed without you knowing anyone was measuring it. You had protected someone who was privately doubting you. That realization brought tears back to your soulmate's eyes. Not dramatic tears of fantasy, but the painful emotion of recognizing how unfairly they had interpreted someone who had shown them quiet respect when they weren't even in the room. Then came the sentence that left your soulmate completely still. The friend wrote, I think I helped you doubt someone who never gave me a real reason to doubt them. Your soulmate lowered the phone. Suddenly, the psychic's questions, your message, and this confession were pointing toward the same truth from completely different directions. They had spent so much energy searching outside themselves for an answer that had been visible through your actions all along. Stay till the end, because your soulmate now had a choice. They could blame the friend for influencing them, or they could accept that nobody had forced them to believe those assumptions. After several minutes, they chose responsibility. They replied, "You influenced me, but I made my own decisions." Then they looked again at the unsent message waiting on their screen. But before sending it, they noticed one final detail in the friend's confession, a name connected to you that your soulmate recognized immediately, and that name opened an entirely new piece of the story. The name belonged to someone your soulmate had assumed barely knew you, which made the next revelation impossible to ignore. According to the friend, this person had witnessed one of the most misunderstood moments in your entire connection, the day you became noticeably distant. Your soulmate had always believed you pulled away because your interest faded. But this person remembered seeing you shortly afterward, and your behavior told a very different story. You weren't celebrating your distance. You weren't acting relieved to be free of the connection. You were quiet, thoughtful, and clearly trying to process something without speaking badly about anyone. When someone asked what had happened, you refused to blame your soulmate. You simply said that sometimes caring about someone also means knowing when to stop forcing closeness. Your soulmate felt their chest tighten reading those words. Don't skip, because they suddenly realized your withdrawal had never been the proof against you they thought it was. For months, your soulmate had used that one period of silence as their strongest argument that your feelings couldn't have been genuine. Now it became evidence of something entirely different. You had stepped back while still protecting their dignity. Even while disappointed, you hadn't turned your private connection into public entertainment. That mattered deeply because your soulmate remembered how easily they had discussed their doubts about you with other people. The contrast was uncomfortable. They had invited outside opinions into something deeply personal, while you had quietly kept the details between you. Something huge is waiting for you, because this was the moment your soulmate stopped viewing the psychic session as the event that revealed your truth. The truth had been revealing itself through your behavior all along. The session simply forced them to notice what fear had trained them to overlook. And once they understood that, the message they were about to send you suddenly felt incomplete. Your soulmate deleted the sentence they had prepared, not because it was dishonest, but because they finally understood that words couldn't carry everything they wanted to repair. Instead, they sent something simpler: "I'm beginning to understand what my doubt put you through. I won't ask you to trust a promise. I'll respect whatever pace feels right to you." Then they put the phone away. No staring at the screen. No countdown waiting for your response. No secret test. For the first time, they allowed you the same freedom you had repeatedly given them. But the story wasn't finished. Hours later, after the tears had finally slowed and your soulmate was alone replaying everything, their phone lit up again. This time, your message contained a question rather than an answer. It was only a few words, but it made them sit upright immediately, because you were asking about something they had never told you, something that happened before they ever hired the psychic. Your question was simple: why were you already preparing to walk away before you ever asked me what I felt? Your soulmate stared at the screen, stunned by how precisely you had reached the truth they had kept hidden. Before visiting the psychic, they had already been creating an ending in their mind. They had replayed your quiet moments as rejection, interpreted your independence as emotional distance, and collected every uncertain detail until it supported the conclusion they were afraid to challenge. The psychic had never been their first attempt to understand you. She had been their final attempt to confirm a decision they had almost already made. And somehow, your question exposed that. Your soulmate began typing an explanation, erased it, then started again. This time they refused to hide behind phrases like, "I was confused." They wrote the harder truth, "I was preparing to leave because I thought leaving first would hurt less than finding out I mattered less to you than you mattered to me." Don't skip, because admitting that changed the entire conversation. Your response didn't arrive immediately, and your soulmate didn't panic this time. When it finally appeared, you didn't criticize them. You simply asked why they never gave you the chance to answer that fear directly. That question cut deeper than anything the psychic had said. Your soulmate remembered countless opportunities when they could have asked you honestly, "Do I matter to you?" Instead, they had created tests. They pulled back to see whether you would chase. They became quieter to see whether you would notice. They listened to other people's interpretations instead of giving you the simplest opportunity to speak for yourself. Now they understood the contradiction. They wanted certainty while communicating through uncertainty. Stay till the end. Because your soulmate finally told you something they had never admitted to anyone, the reason your connection frightened them wasn't that it felt weak. It frightened them because it felt strong enough to matter. After sending that confession, your soulmate expected vulnerability to feel unbearable. Instead, something unexpected happened. For the first time, they felt calm. There was nothing left to prove, manipulate, or investigate. You knew the truth. They knew the truth. Whatever happened next could finally be based on honesty rather than assumptions. Then your response appeared, "That's all I ever wanted you to tell me." Your soulmate covered their mouth as tears returned, because those few words revealed how different everything might have been if they had simply spoken honestly sooner. But something huge was still waiting. You followed that sentence with another message, "There's something I never told you either." Your soulmate's heart raced as the typing indicator appeared again. After everything uncovered that day, they thought there could be no larger revelation left between you. But when your next message finally arrived, it revealed what you had been quietly planning before the distance ever began.